What if everything you thought you knew about BTS was only half the story? In an industry where every idol's schedule is tracked down to the minute, where fan sites capture every airport arrival and every late-night convenience store run, how is it even possible that some of the biggest secrets are still hiding in plain sight? We're talking about whispered rumors that have circulated through Korean online communities, cryptic social media posts that fans decoded way too late, and mysterious trips abroad that never quite added up on the official schedule. 7 members. 7 different lives behind the spotlight. And tonight, we're diving deep into one of the most explosive, jaw-dropping questions the ARMY fandom has ever faced: which BTS member is secretly rumored to have a child living overseas? Now, before you slam that skepticism button, hold on, because what you're about to hear isn't just baseless gossip. We've pulled together real timeline inconsistencies, translated Weverse posts, cross-referenced dispatch reports, and analyzed fan-compiled travel logs that the internet has been quietly obsessing over for years. From number 7 all the way down to number 1, each revelation gets more intense, more shocking, and more emotionally complex than the last. So the real question is, are you ready to see your bias in a light you never expected? Can you handle the truth when the idol you love turns out to be more human than the perfect image you've been sold? And most importantly, who sits at number 1, the member whose story will genuinely leave your jaw on the floor? Stay locked in. This is going to change everything. Number 7. J-Hope. The sunshine that hides behind the clouds, a secret life nobody saw coming. You probably didn't expect this name to kick off the list, and honestly, that's exactly why he's here. Young Hoseok, the man the world knows as J-Hope, has built an almost impenetrable image of pure positivity, endless energy, and that iconic, "I'm your hope, you're my hope" catchphrase that has practically become a global mantra. But here's what most casual fans don't realize: behind that blinding smile and those razor-sharp dance moves lies one of the most private members of BTS, a man who has masterfully separated his public persona from his personal reality in ways that would make even the most seasoned PR strategist take notes. Let's rewind to 2019, a year that ARMY remembers as the peak of BTS's global domination: stadium tours, Grammy appearances, United Nations speeches, the works. But if you were paying close attention to J-Hope's individual schedule, something didn't quite add up. Between the Love Yourself, Speak Yourself tour dates, there were gaps. Not just normal rest days, but extended periods where Hoseok seemed to vanish from social media entirely. No Weverse posts. No Instagram stories. No airport fancam sightings. For a member who was known for consistently updating fans, this radio silence was deafening to those who were actually paying attention. Korean fan communities on Naver and the KO started quietly compiling timelines. One particularly detailed thread, which was later scrubbed from the platform, noted that J-Hope had at least 3 unexplained trips to the United States that didn't correspond with any official BTS schedule, solo work commitment, or known family visit. Now, J-Hope's connection to the United States isn't new. His sister, Young Jaewoo, who runs the fashion brand Mejowo, has traveled internationally for business on multiple occasions. And some fans initially assumed Hoseok was simply accompanying her or handling personal brand-related matters. But the timeline didn't support that theory either, because Jaewoo's documented travel dates didn't overlap with her brother's mystery absences. Then came the real fuel for the fire: a series of cryptic posts on Weverse in late 2019 and early 2020, where J-Hope used language that fans later analyzed as unusually emotional and reflective for his typically upbeat communication style. One post in particular, loosely translated, reads something like, "The most precious things in life aren't on stage," which at the time was interpreted as a simple philosophical musing. But when cross-referenced with his absence patterns and the growing whispers in Korean online communities, some fans started connecting dots that perhaps were never meant to be connected. Adding another layer to this mystery is J-Hope's well-documented financial activity. Public records in South Korea show that Hoseok has been one of the most aggressive real estate investors among the BTS members, purchasing multiple high-value properties in Seoul's most exclusive districts, Hanam-dong, Seongsu-dong. We're talking properties valued in the billions of Korean won. But here's the detail that raised eyebrows among financial analysts and entertainment reporters alike. At least one property purchase was structured through a rather unusual trust arrangement that isn't typical for a single, childless celebrity in their late 20s. Trust structures of that particular type in South Korean real estate law are more commonly associated with asset protection strategies used by individuals who are planning for dependents. Is that conclusive evidence? Absolutely not. Could there be a dozen perfectly mundane explanations? Of course. Maybe he was protecting assets from potential lawsuits. Maybe his financial advisor simply recommended a conservative approach. Maybe he was planning for his parents' future. All valid possibilities. But when you stack the unexplained travel, the emotional social media posts, the financial structuring, and the deliberate media silence together, you start to see why this particular rumor refused to die in Korean fan circles despite having the least concrete evidence of anyone on this list. What makes J-Hope's situation particularly fascinating from a cultural analysis perspective is how perfectly it illustrates the impossible standard that K-pop idols are held to. Here's a man in his late 20s, now 30s, who has dedicated over a decade of his life to an industry that essentially demands the sacrifice of normal human experiences. Dating, relationships, family planning, these are basic life milestones that billions of people experience without scrutiny, yet for someone like Hoseok, even the suggestion of having a personal life beyond the stage is treated as either scandal or betrayal. The emotional weight of that reality is something most fans never stop to consider. Whether J-Hope has a child abroad or not, the mere fact that he would have to hide something so fundamental to human existence tells you everything you need about the suffocating nature of idol culture. And yet, even with all of this, J-Hope sits at number 7, the lowest position on our list, because compared to what's coming next, this is merely the appetizer. The evidence here is circumstantial at best, speculative at worst, and Hoseok's privacy choices could easily be explained by simple introversion that contradicts his stage persona. But don't get comfortable, because the member sitting at number 6 has a trail of breadcrumbs that fans have been following for years, and the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to look away. Number 6. Suga. The silent genius with a hidden world beyond the studio. What was he really doing in America? Min Youngie has always been the enigma of BTS, the quiet producer who lets his music scream what his mouth refuses to whisper. While the other members dazzle on variety shows and flood social media with selfies, Suga has consistently operated in the shadows, building an empire of sound that spans far beyond the BTS discography. But what if those shadows were hiding something far more personal than unreleased beats and scrapped lyrics? To understand why Suga lands at number 6, you need to first appreciate just how differently this man moves compared to his groupmates. Youngie is not just a rapper and performer, he is Auguste, a solo artist with a critically acclaimed trilogy of albums that explored depression, societal pressure, fame, and deeply personal trauma with a raw honesty that most K-pop idols wouldn't dare touch. He is also a prolific producer who has worked behind the scenes with artists across multiple continents, from Halsey to Juice WRLD to PSY to IU. That producer life is crucial to this story because it gave Youngie something that very few K-pop idols ever truly have, a legitimate, business-justified reason to travel internationally without raising a single eyebrow. And travel he did. Between 2018 and 2022, industry insiders noted that Suga made numerous trips to Los Angeles, a city that serves as the global hub for music production and collaboration. On the surface, every single trip could be explained by studio sessions, mixing work, or meetings with American producers and songwriters. BigHit Entertainment, now HYBE, never had to issue explanations because the trips made perfect professional sense. But here's where it gets interesting. A Korean entertainment journalist, writing under a pseudonym on a now-deleted blog post that was archived by vigilant fans, claimed in mid-2020 that at least 2 of Suga's LA trips included extended stays in residential neighborhoods far from the typical studio districts of Hollywood, Burbank, or Santa Monica. The blog post, which was taken down within 48 hours of publication, sparking its own wave of conspiracy theories about who ordered the removal, specifically mentioned that Youngie was spotted in a quiet suburban area of Pasadena. Not once, but multiple times across different trips, by a Korean-American resident who recognized him despite his signature low-profile disguise of bucket hats and oversized hoodies. Pasadena. Not exactly the place you go to lay down tracks or negotiate publishing deals. Now let's talk about something that longtime ARMY have debated endlessly, but never reached consensus on: Suga's emotional evolution in his music. If you trace the lyrical journey from his first August D mixtape in 2016 through D2 in 2020, and finally to D-Day in 2023, there is an unmistakable shift. The early work is angry, desperate, clawing at the walls of depression and industry exploitation. The middle work is conflicted, wrestling with fame and identity. But D-Day, and this is what truly caught the attention of music analysts and fan theorists alike, carries an undercurrent of something entirely new for Youngie: tenderness. Not romantic tenderness directed at a partner, but a broader, almost parental warmth that seeps through tracks in ways that feel deeply lived in rather than hypothetically imagined. The track Life Goes On from the B album, which Suga had significant creative input on, contains a melodic motif that Korean music theory enthusiasts on fan forums identified as remarkably similar to traditional lullaby structures. A detail that could be pure coincidence or could be a subconscious creative choice influenced by personal experience. Music psychologists have long studied how major life events, particularly becoming a parent, fundamentally alter an artist's creative output, often in ways the artist themselves doesn't consciously recognize. The softening of aggressive sonic palettes, the introduction of cyclical melodic patterns associated with comfort and repetition, the shift from self-focused lyrics to outward-looking themes of legacy and future. All of these markers appeared in Suga's later work with a consistency that goes beyond simple artistic maturation. Then there's the financial angle, and with Youngie, it gets particularly intriguing. Unlike J-Hope's domestic real estate moves, Suga's financial footprint extended internationally in ways that weren't widely reported until a 2021 deep dive by a Korean financial publication. The article, which focused broadly on HYBE artists' investment portfolios, mentioned in passing that Min Youngie had established financial vehicles in the United States that went beyond simple investment accounts. The specific nature of these vehicles wasn't disclosed due to privacy laws, but the journalist noted that the structure was atypical for a foreign national without U.S.-based family obligations. That single phrase, without U.S.-based family obligations, sent Korean internet forums into a frenzy that lasted weeks. HYBE's legal team reportedly sent a cease and desist to the publication, not for the article's financial analysis, but specifically for that editorialized phrase, which arguably crossed the line from financial reporting into personal speculation. The fact that HYBE's response targeted that specific detail rather than the article as a whole only amplified suspicion among those already inclined to believe the rumors. But perhaps the most compelling piece of this puzzle isn't financial or musical, it's behavioral. People close to the BTS inner circle, speaking anonymously to multiple Korean entertainment outlets over the years, have consistently described Youngie as the member whose private life is most aggressively protected. Not by HYBE's PR team, but by the other members themselves. There's an unspoken code within BTS, visible in countless behind-the-scenes moments, where the members instinctively redirect conversations, cameras, and interviewer questions whenever they drift too close to Youngie's personal territory. Watch any group interview from 2020 onward with this lens, and you'll notice it. The subtle topic changes, the perfectly timed jokes from other members when a question gets too personal for Youngie, the almost choreographed way they shield him. Is that just friendship? Is that just respect for an introverted member's boundaries? Or is it something more? A collective agreement to protect a secret that all 7 of them carry together? Suga sits at number 6 because the circumstantial evidence is stronger than J-Hope's, the behavioral patterns are more pronounced, and the financial trail raises questions that haven't been adequately answered. But he doesn't climb higher because Youngie's intensely private nature makes it nearly impossible to distinguish between a man hiding a child and a man simply hiding himself from a world that demands too much access. That distinction matters. Yet as you sit there processing everything you've just heard about Min Young-hee, I need you to brace yourself, because the member at number 5 doesn't just have circumstantial evidence and behavioral clues. Number 5 has something far more dangerous for keeping secrets, photographs that fans were never supposed to find. Number 5. V. The wandering soul with too many uncharted destinations. What happened in Paris? Kim Taehyung has never lived by anyone else's rules, and if you've followed BTS long enough, you already know that V operates on a completely different wavelength from the rest of the group. He's the member who befriends Oscar-winning actors on a whim, the one who disappears into European art galleries for hours while the rest of the group naps at the hotel. The man whose personal aesthetic oscillates between vintage Parisian aristocrat and barefoot countryside philosopher without a single moment of contradiction. Taehyung is, by every possible definition, a free spirit, and it's precisely that freedom that makes his story the most visually traceable and the most geographically suspicious entry on this list so far. Let's start with what everyone saw, but very few questioned at the time, V's relationship with travel. Between 2017 and 2023, no BTS member logged more personal international trips than Kim Taehyung. While some of those trips were well documented, the Hawaii vacation clips that ended up in BTS content, the group's downtime footage from various tour cities. A significant number of Taehyung's solo travels existed in a strange gray zone where fans knew he was abroad but couldn't pinpoint exactly where, exactly why, or exactly who he was with. And the destination that kept reappearing like a recurring dream? Paris. Now, V's love affair with Paris is hardly a secret. He's spoken about it openly, posted aesthetic photographs of Parisian streets, and even incorporated French artistic influences into his solo music and visual projects. The city fits his brand perfectly, and nobody would question a globally famous artist spending time in one of the world's cultural capitals. But here's the thing: that French army, specifically a tight-knit community of Parisian fans who monitored celebrity sightings across the city, started noticing as early as 2019. Taehyung's Paris visits didn't follow tourist patterns or even typical celebrity patterns. He wasn't spotted at the Louvre, the Eiffel Tower, or the high-end shopping districts of Avenue Montaigne, where most Korean celebrities gravitate. Instead, sightings consistently placed him in the 16th arrondissement, one of Paris's most exclusive residential districts, known for its quiet, tree-lined streets, prestigious international schools, and a large community of wealthy expatriate families who value privacy above all else. The 16th arrondissement. Not the 1st, not the 8th, not the glittering tourist quarters. The residential, family-oriented 16th. Multiple sightings. Across multiple trips. Spanning multiple years. French fan accounts that tracked these appearances, most of which were posted and then quickly deleted after receiving aggressive pushback from larger fan accounts demanding respect for Taehyung's privacy, painted a picture of someone who wasn't visiting Paris as a tourist or even as an artist seeking inspiration. He was visiting specific locations with a regularity that suggested routine, obligation, or deep personal attachment. Then came the photograph that nearly broke the internet before it was buried. In late 2021, a blurry image surfaced on a small French social media platform, not Twitter, not Instagram, but a regional French photo-sharing community with barely 10,000 users. The image, taken from a considerable distance and clearly without the subject's knowledge, appeared to show a tall figure matching Taehyung's distinctive silhouette walking through a park in Boulogne-Billancourt, a wealthy suburb adjacent to the 16th arrondissement, accompanied by what appeared to be an older woman and a small child. The image quality was poor enough that definitive identification was impossible, and it was removed within hours, but not before Korean fan archivists had already captured, enhanced, and dissected every pixel. The clothing matched items Taehyung had been photographed wearing in airport departure shots from just days earlier. The body proportions, the gait, even the way the figure held their hands in their coat pockets, all consistent with years of fancam footage that fans had memorized down to the smallest physical mannerism. Was it Taehyung? The resolution couldn't confirm it. But it couldn't deny it either, and that ambiguity became the foundation of what Korean netizens dubbed the Paris theory, a sprawling, obsessively documented fan investigation that connected Taehyung's travel dates, his social media silence periods, and his emotional state in public appearances into a timeline that, if you squint hard enough, tells a story far different from the carefree bachelor narrative HYBE has always projected. But the evidence doesn't stop at travel patterns and blurry photos. Let's talk about Taehyung's art, specifically his visual art, which has become increasingly central to his public identity. V has shared numerous paintings and sketches over the years, and while most are abstract or nature-inspired, art analysts on Korean platforms identified a recurring motif in his work from 2020 onward that stopped them cold: small handprints. Not stamped or stenciled, painted freehand with deliberate care, tucked into corners of larger pieces or hidden within abstract compositions in a way that feels intentionally subtle. In one particular piece shared on Weverse, a handprint no larger than a toddler's palm was discovered by fans who adjusted the image's contrast and brightness, invisible at normal viewing settings, but unmistakably present when enhanced. Coincidence? Artistic choice? Subconscious expression? The interpretation depends entirely on what you already believe, but the pattern's consistency across multiple artworks makes the random coincidence explanation increasingly difficult to sustain. And then there's V's documented, undeniable, almost painfully obvious love for children. This isn't speculation. It's one of the most visible aspects of his personality across over a decade of public content. Watch any BTS episode where children are present and Taehyung transforms. His entire energy shifts. The playful goofiness gives way to something gentler, more patient, more instinctively nurturing than what you'd typically expect from a man in his 20s navigating the hyper-masculine pressures of the entertainment industry. He doesn't just interact with children, he connects with them on their level in a way that childhood development experts have noted requires either extensive experience or extraordinary natural empathy. During a fan meeting in Japan, Taehyung spent nearly 15 minutes with a young child who had accompanied their parent to the event, completely ignoring the schedule, the staff signals, and the waiting line to ensure the child felt seen and comfortable. The moment went viral not because it was unusual for V, but because it was so quintessentially him that fans couldn't help but wonder, where does empathy this deep, this practiced, this instinctive actually come from? Taehyung himself has spoken multiple times about wanting children, about valuing family above career, about dreaming of a life where he can be a father. In a 2020 interview, he described his ideal future not in terms of music sales or acting roles, but in terms of having someone small who looks at you like you're their whole world. The quote was widely shared as endearing and aspirational, but in the context of the Paris sightings, the hidden handprints, and the suburban visits, those words take on an entirely different weight. V sits at number 5 because the visual evidence, however circumstantial, is stronger than anything we've seen for J-Hope or Suga. The geographic patterns are specific and repeated. The photographic near miss is tantalizing. And his own art and words seem to whisper a truth that his management would never allow him to speak out loud. He doesn't rank higher because Paris is a city of millions, blurry photos prove nothing in court, and an artist painting small handprints could simply be an artist painting small handprints. But the accumulation of these details creates a mosaic that's harder to dismiss than any single piece alone. Now take a breath, because the member waiting at number 4 doesn't have blurry photos or hidden motifs. This one has witnesses, timestamps, and a medical record rumor that sent HYBE's legal department into full emergency mode. Number 4. Jungkook. The Golden Magne's golden secret, why HYBE lawyers worked overtime in 2021. If there's one member of BTS that the entire world believes they know inside and out, it's Jungkook. The Golden Magne. The boy who auditioned at 15, who grew up in front of millions, whose every haircut, tattoo, and gym selfie becomes a global trending topic within minutes. Jungkook's life has been lived under a microscope so powerful that fans can identify which brand of fabric softener he uses based on a 2-second laundry room cameo in a behind-the-scenes clip. So the very idea that this man, The most watched, most photographed, most obsessively documented idol in the history of K-pop could be hiding a child feels almost laughable at first glance. Almost. But what you're about to hear isn't a laughing matter, and by the time we reach the end of this entry, you'll understand exactly why Jungkook sits at number 4 and not lower. The story begins not with Jungkook himself, but with an anonymous post on Blind, the verified employee-only Korean app where workers from major corporations share insider information under the protection of anonymity. In March 2021, an account verified as a HYBE employee posted a cryptic message that translated roughly to, "Legal department has been in emergency meetings for 3 days straight." Not about music rights. Something personal involving a top artist. The word overseas keeps coming up. The post was deleted within an hour, the account was deactivated, and HYBE issued no public comment. But screenshots had already spread to the Coup, Naver Cafe, and eventually international platforms like Reddit and Twitter, where translation teams worked around the clock to verify the language nuances. Now, a single anonymous post on Blind wouldn't normally warrant serious attention. Disgruntled employees, attention seekers, and trolls are as common there as anywhere else on the internet. But what elevated this particular post from gossip to genuine intrigue was the timing. Because exactly 1 week before that Blind post appeared, Dispatch, South Korea's most feared entertainment news outlet, the publication that has single-handedly ended careers and exposed relationships that agencies spent millions to conceal, made an unusual move. They published a brief, almost throwaway article about Jungkook's personal growth that included a single line noting he had been making regular private visits to a Southeast Asian country for personal reasons unrelated to work. The article framed it positively, almost admiringly, as evidence of the magnate's maturing independence. But Dispatch doesn't write fluff pieces. They never have. Every word that publication prints is calculated, and veteran K-pop journalists immediately recognized the article for what it was, a marker. A planted flag. Dispatch was signaling that they had information, that they were watching, and that the full story was being held in reserve. Southeast Asia. That detail is critical because it narrows the geography in ways that European or American rumors never could. While Paris or Los Angeles offer anonymity through sheer population density, Southeast Asian countries, particularly those with active K-pop fan communities in Thailand, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam, have fan networks so deeply embedded in local infrastructure that an idol's presence is almost impossible to conceal for long. And yet, whatever Jungkook was doing in these visits, he managed to do it without a single verified fancam surfacing. Think about that for a moment. Jungkook, arguably the most recognizable face in Asian entertainment, repeatedly visited a region with some of the most dedicated, most eagle-eyed fan bases on the planet, and not one confirmed sighting leaked. That level of operational security doesn't happen by accident. It requires planning, resources, professional-grade privacy management, and most importantly, a reason compelling enough to justify that extraordinary level of effort. You don't hire private security teams and book under fake names to go sightseeing in Bangkok. Something was being protected, and the lengths taken to protect it suggest that something was far more important than a casual vacation or a secret romance. Then there's the medical record rumor, and this is where things escalated from internet speculation to real-world legal confrontation. In mid-2021, a now-defunct Korean gossip blog claimed to have obtained second-hand information about a hospital record from a private international clinic, not in Korea, but in an unspecified Southeast Asian country, that allegedly listed a minor patient with a Korean surname matching Jungkook's family name, John, with a parental contact number traced to a Korean mobile carrier. The blog did not publish the document, did not name the country, and explicitly stated they could not verify the information's authenticity. Despite these caveats, HYBE's response was thermonuclear. Within 24 hours of the blog post going live, HYBE Corporation's legal team filed formal complaints with Korean cyber police, issued takedown demands through 3 separate legal jurisdictions, and released a terse public statement warning that The dissemination of fabricated personal information regarding our artists will be met with the fullest extent of legal action without exception or settlement. That statement is worth examining closely because of what it didn't say. It didn't say the information was false. It said fabricated, a legally distinct term in Korean defamation law that refers to information created with harmful intent, regardless of its truth value. Korean legal experts who analyzed the statement on law-focused YouTube channels noted that HYBE's choice of language was unusually careful, avoiding the definitive denial that agencies typically deploy when rumors are genuinely baseless. When an accusation is completely untrue, Korean entertainment companies usually say there is no truth to these claims, a straightforward, unambiguous denial. HYBE chose a different path, and that choice has fueled speculation that continues to this day. Beyond the legal drama, there's a deeply human dimension to this story that deserves attention. Jungkook grew up in the public eye. He was a child when he entered this industry, literally a 15-year-old boy separated from his family in Busan, living in a dormitory with 6 older boys, training through exhaustion and homesickness to become what the world now celebrates as the golden magne. He never had a normal adolescence. He never had the freedom to make mistakes privately, to explore relationships without tabloid consequences, to experience the messy, beautiful, terrifying process of becoming an adult without millions of eyes grading his every move. If, and this remains an if, Jungkook became a father during those chaotic years of global superstardom, the emotional complexity of that situation is almost unfathomable. A young man in his early 20s, at the absolute peak of his career, navigating the most scrutinized existence in entertainment, simultaneously trying to be present for a child in another country while knowing that a single leaked photo could trigger a scandal capable of destabilizing not just his career, but the careers of 6 other men who depend on the group's collective image. The psychological weight of carrying that secret, if it exists, would be crushing. And perhaps that weight explains something fans have observed but rarely discussed in depth: Jungkook's visible emotional shifts during the 2021-2022 period. Rewatch his V-Live sessions from that era. Look past the playful drinking streams and the late-night singing sessions. There are moments, brief, flickering, easily missed if you're not looking for them, where something crosses his face that goes beyond idol fatigue or introversion. A heaviness. A distraction. His eyes unfocusing mid-sentence as if his mind has traveled somewhere his body can't follow. Fans attributed it to burnout, to military service anxiety, to the general pressure of being Jungkook. But in the context of everything you've just heard, those moments take on a different texture. Jungkook holds number 4 because the evidence surrounding him is qualitatively different from the members below. This isn't about travel patterns or artistic symbolism. This involves corporate legal mobilization, professional journalist signals, verified employee leaks, and a medical record rumor serious enough to trigger a multi-jurisdictional legal response. The machinery that moved to contain this story was industrial in scale, and in the entertainment industry, machinery of that magnitude doesn't activate for nothing. Still, he doesn't crack the top 3 because Dispatch has not pulled the trigger, no verified photograph exists, and HYBE's legal barrage effectively froze the story before it could develop further. But as you process what you've just learned about the Golden Magne, prepare yourself, because the member at number 3 didn't have a corporation protecting their secret. They had only themselves, a plane ticket, and a decision that changed everything quietly, irreversibly, and without a single headline. Number 3, Jimin, the eldest son's unspoken burden, a military secret that goes deeper than service. Kim Seokjin, the worldwide handsome, the eldest young, the man who held BTS together during their darkest trainee days with dad jokes, home-cooked meals, and a quiet emotional stability that every single member has credited, at one point or another, as the reason they didn't quit. Jimin has always been the most underestimated member of BTS, not in talent, not in looks, but in depth. The public sees the comedy, the flying kisses, the exaggerated confidence played for laughs. What they rarely see is the man behind the performance, a deeply thoughtful, fiercely private individual who studied acting at Konkuk University, who comes from a family with serious business connections, and who has navigated the impossible pressure of being the oldest member in a group where the industry constantly prioritizes youth. Jin has carried weight that most fans never fully appreciate, and what you're about to hear suggests that the heaviest weight of all might be one he's been carrying in absolute silence for years. The critical timeline for Jin's story doesn't begin with a cryptic social media post or a blurry photograph. It begins with geography and a detail so specific that when Korean investigative fans first compiled it, even skeptics had to pause. Between 2018 and 2020, during BTS's most grueling international touring schedule, Jin made a series of personal side trips that deviated from the group's official itinerary in ways that were meticulously documented by airport tracking fan accounts. The dedicated groups who photograph idol departures and arrivals with the precision of air traffic controllers. While the other members typically flew together on group schedules and returned together, Jin was recorded on at least 4 separate occasions flying to a destination alone, returning to rejoin the group hours or sometimes a full day later than the rest. The destination? Auckland, New Zealand. Not Tokyo, not LA, not London, Auckland. A city with virtually zero connection to the K-pop industry, no major entertainment infrastructure relevant to a BTS member's career, and perhaps most importantly, a relatively small Korean expatriate community compared to cities like Sydney, Vancouver, or Los Angeles, where Korean celebrities might blend into larger diaspora populations. Why would Kim Seokjin, during the most commercially explosive period of BTS's career, repeatedly visit one of the most geographically isolated major cities in the world? His management listed no schedules there, no brand endorsements, no variety show filmings, no collaborations. No known family connections to New Zealand appeared in any public record. The trips existed in a vacuum of explanation that Jin himself never addressed and that HYBE never acknowledged. Fan accounts who tracked these movements reported something else that deepened the mystery. Jin's emotional state upon returning from these Auckland trips was markedly different from his usual demeanor. Normally the group's most outwardly cheerful member, Seokjin appeared in post-Auckland airport arrival photos looking withdrawn, sometimes visibly red-eyed, occasionally wearing face masks and hats pulled low in combinations that suggested not just privacy, but active concealment of emotional distress. These weren't the tired eyes of jet-lagged fans who had catalogued thousands of his airport photos could distinguish between exhaustion and something heavier. One particularly observant Korean fan account wrote, "He looks like someone who just said goodbye to something he can't talk about." That single observation, posted in 2019, became the foundational text of what New Zealand Army later dubbed the Auckland Files, a collaborative investigation that would span years, continents, and languages. New Zealand-based fans, once alerted to the pattern, began their own quiet research. What they found wasn't a smoking gun, but it was something that raised the room temperature significantly. Through publicly accessible New Zealand birth registry indexes, which, unlike South Korea's tightly controlled records, allow limited public searches, researchers identified that during the relevant time period, there were a small number of births registered in the Auckland metropolitan area where the father's nationality was listed as South Korean and the father's name field was either redacted or marked as confidential. New Zealand law allows for confidential birth registrations under specific circumstances, typically involving public figures, security concerns, or situations where disclosure could endanger the child or parents. The number of confidential Korean national father registrations in Auckland during that specific 2-year window was, according to the fan researchers, statistically unusual for a city of Auckland's size and demographic composition. Does this prove anything about genes specifically? No. Could those registrations involve any number of Korean nationals living or working in New Zealand? Absolutely. But the temporal overlap with Jin's documented visits created a correlation that, while far from causation, was impossible to completely dismiss. And then military service happened, and with it came the detail that elevated Jin's story from circumstantial mystery to something far more emotionally resonant. When Jin enlisted in December 2022, becoming the first BTS member to begin mandatory military service, HYBE released carefully managed content showing his head-shaving ceremony and his farewell. The footage was emotional, the fan response was overwhelming, and the media coverage was wall-to-wall. But buried beneath the avalanche of military service coverage was a small but significant legal filing that Korean legal watchers flagged Jin through personal attorneys separate from HYBE's corporate legal team, filed updated documentation with Korean authorities related to overseas financial obligations. In South Korean law, individuals entering military service are required to disclose certain financial commitments, particularly those involving regular international transfers, to ensure compliance with currency regulations and to prevent potential conflicts during the service period. The specifics of Jin's filing were sealed, as all such documents are, but the mere existence of a filing involving overseas financial obligations, handled not by HYBE's team, but by Jin's personal lawyers, was unusual enough to generate attention among the small community of legal professionals who monitor entertainment industry filings. Regular international financial transfers. To where? For what purpose? Investment management doesn't typically require the kind of legal restructuring that military service triggers. Those systems run on autopilot through financial advisors. What requires active legal attention during a service transition is ongoing personal obligations, support payments, custodial financial arrangements, dependent-related commitments that can't simply be paused or automated for 18 months without proper legal framework. Here's what makes Jin's position at number 3 so emotionally devastating to consider. This is a man who, for over a decade, played the role of BTS's comedic relief, the member who deflected emotional weight with humor, who made himself the punchline so others could be the hero, who spent years convincing the world that he was the simple, happy, easygoing Hyung with no complications and no darkness. But the people who know Jin best, his members, have occasionally let slip descriptions that paint a radically different portrait. RM once described Jin as the member who sacrifices the most and says the least about it. Jimin called him someone who carries things alone even when we beg him to share. Suga, in one of his most candid moments, said Jin understands pain in a way that the rest of us are still learning. These aren't throwaway compliments. These are descriptions of a man who, in the eyes of the people closest to him, bears invisible burdens with a discipline that borders on self-punishment. If Kim Seokjin has a child in New Zealand, a child he can only visit in stolen hours between world tours, a child growing up on the other side of the planet from a father who can't publicly acknowledge their existence, a child whose bedtime stories come through encrypted video calls rather than a father's physical presence, then every dad joke, every exaggerated wink, every worldwide handsome declaration becomes something else entirely. They become armor. A performance of lightness designed to conceal the heaviest thing a human heart can carry, the love for a child you can't hold whenever you want. Jin sits at number 3. Because the evidence trail is geographically specific, financially documented through legal filings, and corroborated by behavioral patterns observed across years of public content. The Auckland connection provides a framework that other members' rumors lack, a repeatable, verifiable travel pattern to a location with no alternative explanation. He doesn't reach number 2 because the birth registry data is statistical, not personal, and the financial filing details remain sealed. But the emotional weight of his story, the eldest son who may have become a father while simultaneously fathering an entire group through their most challenging years, makes this entry the hardest one to walk away from unchanged. And yet, you need to keep walking, because the member at number 2 carries evidence so specific, so personal, and so heartbreakingly well hidden that when fans... Number 2, Jimin, the angel who loved in silence, a lullaby hidden inside his own album. Park Jimin has always been the member who feels everything twice, as deeply as everyone else in the room. Where others guard their emotions behind professionalism or humor, Jimin has never learned, or perhaps never wanted to learn, how to stop his heart from bleeding through his eyes. He's the member who cries during acceptance speeches, who holds his members' hands when cameras aren't rolling, who once told a stadium of 80,000 people that they were the reason he wanted to keep living when the weight of fame nearly crushed him. Jimin doesn't perform emotion. He inhabits it, fully and recklessly, in a way that has made him one of the most magnetically beloved entertainers on the planet. And it's precisely that emotional transparency that makes his entry on this list so uniquely devastating, because when the evidence emerged, it didn't come from leaked documents or anonymous insider posts. It came from Jimin himself, woven into his art so delicately that by the time fans decoded it, they realized he'd been telling them all along. The story of Jimin's suspected secret begins not with travel logs or financial filings, but with a name that appeared in a place no one expected and that Jimin has never publicly explained. In March 2023, Jimin released his first solo album, Face, a deeply personal project that he described as a confrontation with his own identity, his fears, and the parts of himself he'd been hiding from the world. The album was raw, confessional, and sonically unlike anything BTS had produced as a group. Critics praised it. Fans devoured it. But buried in the album's digital liner notes, the metadata that most listeners never bothered to check was a dedication. Not to BTS. Not to ARMY. Not to his family in Busan. A single name, written in Romanized Korean, that didn't match any known person in Jimin's public life. Fan investigators who specialize in K-pop album metadata, yes, this level of dedication exists in this fandom, immediately flagged the anomaly. The name was cross-referenced against every known associate, friend, family member, staff member, and collaborator in Jimin's documented history. Nothing matched. It was searched against Korean name databases, common naming conventions, and even Hanja character combinations that might indicate a generational or familial naming pattern from the Park family lineage. What researchers found wasn't a match, it was a pattern. The name structure followed a convention commonly used in Korean naming traditions for children. Specifically, it contained a generational character consistent with the Park family's known generational naming scheme. The traditional practice where one syllable of a child's name is shared across all children of the same generation within a family. This isn't obscure cultural knowledge, it's a fundamental Korean naming tradition that any Korean speaker would immediately recognize. Jimin had hidden a name in his most personal artistic work that linguistically resembled a child's name from his own family line. Coincidence remains possible. Perhaps it was a poetic device, a fictional character, a tribute to someone fans simply don't know about. But the discovery sent shockwaves through fan investigation communities because it aligned with a separate, pre-existing thread of evidence that had been quietly building since 2020. That thread centered on Jimin's relationship with Japan, specifically, with a city that isn't Tokyo, Osaka, or any of the metropolitan hubs that BTS regularly visited for concerts and promotions. Fans had long known that Jimin harbored a special affection for Japan. He studied Japanese more diligently than most members, frequently used Japanese phrases in fan communications, and spoke about Japanese culture with a warmth and specificity that went beyond professional obligation. But what airport tracking accounts noticed was that Jimin's personal Japan trips, the ones outside official BTS schedules, consistently routed through Fukuoka, the largest city on Japan's southern island of Kyushu, located barely a 200-kilometer straight crossing from Jimin's hometown of Busan. Fukuoka, a city with deep historical and cultural ties to Korea's southeastern coast. A city where the Korean expatriate community is substantial, but tight-knit enough to maintain privacy. A city close enough to Busan that the cultural and linguistic transition is smoother than almost any other international destination a Korean national could choose. Between 2019 and 2022, Jimin was documented traveling to or through Fukuoka at least 5 times outside of any BTS-related schedule. Not Tokyo, where the group's Japanese label is headquartered. Not Osaka, where their Japanese concerts typically occurred. Fukuoka, a city with no apparent professional connection to Jimin's career, but with a geographic and cultural logic that would make it the most natural choice for a Korean man from Busan who needed to be close to someone living just across the water. The Fukuoka connection gained another dimension when a Japanese fan account, one known for reliability and restraint in an ecosystem rife with exaggeration, reported in early 2022 that Jimin had been seen at a department store in Fukuoka's Tenjin shopping district purchasing items from the children's clothing section. The account specified that Jimin was accompanied by an older Korean-speaking woman who did not match any known family member or staff, and that he spent considerable time carefully selecting items in a size range consistent with a toddler aged approximately 2 to 3 years. The fan account's operator, when pressed by followers demanding more details, responded with a statement that has since become legendary in Jimin investigation circles. "I saw what I saw. I will not say more because some truths are not mine to tell. But please trust that he looked happy, happier than I have ever seen him on stage." That line, "happier than I have ever seen him on stage," struck like lightning across every platform where it was shared. Because if you know Jimin, if you've watched him perform, you know that the stage is where he comes most alive. It's where the insecure boy from Busan transforms into something incandescent, something almost superhuman. For someone to see him off stage and describe him as happier than that, whatever he was doing in that Fukuoka department store, it fulfilled something in him that global fame and 70 million fans could not. Now let's return to the music, because Face wasn't the only piece of Jimin's artistic output that fans have re-examined through this lens. His solo song, Promise, self-composed and released for free on SoundCloud in 2018, has long been interpreted as a message to fans about perseverance and self-love. But Korean lyric analysts who revisited the song's original Korean text identified dual-meaning constructions, a common technique in Korean songwriting where phrases can be read as addressing either a general audience or a specific individual depending on contextual interpretation. Lines like, "Don't be afraid, because I'm by your side, and at the end of this long day, I want to be your resting place," carry one meaning when directed at millions of fans and an entirely different, far more intimate meaning when imagined as words spoken to a child at bedtime. The melodic structure of Promise also drew attention from music theorists who noted its unusually slow tempo, its circular chord progression, and its repetitive, soothing vocal delivery, all hallmarks of music designed for infant auditory comfort. Jimin, who studied contemporary dance and has an intuitive understanding of rhythm's emotional effect on the body, would have been more than capable of deliberately crafting a song that functions simultaneously as a fan dedication and a lullaby. The genius of it, if intentional, is breathtaking. A father singing his child to sleep in front of the entire world, and no one hearing it for what it truly was. There's one more element that places Jimin at number 2, and it's perhaps the most quietly heartbreaking of all. During BTS's later group activities, particularly the Festa dinners and behind-the-scenes content from 2021 and 2022, attentive fans noticed that Jimin began wearing a ring on a chain around his neck. Not his usual accessories, which were typically fashion-forward statement pieces selected by stylists, but a simple, small band that appeared to be sized for a finger much smaller than his own. Number 1, RM. The leader who built a second life in plain sight. The museum visits were never about art. Kim Namjoon. The leader. The voice of a generation. The man who stood at the United Nations podium and told the youth of the world to love themselves, who taught himself English by watching Friends reruns in a tiny bedroom in Ilsan, who carried the impossible burden of being the spokesperson, the translator, the diplomat, and the creative engine of the biggest musical act in human history, all before his 30th birthday. RM is the member that the world trusts with words, with meaning, with truth. So when the evidence trail for number 1 leads directly to him, it doesn't just shock, it fundamentally recalibrates everything you thought you understood about the man who has been speaking to you, for you, and about you for over a decade. And the reason this story has remained hidden in plain sight for so long is almost poetically simple. Namjoon hid his secret inside the one thing nobody would ever question, his identity as an intellectual. Let that sink in for a moment before we proceed, because once you understand the mechanism of concealment, every museum visit, every solo travel vlog, every philosophical Instagram caption you've ever admired transforms into something far more complex than cultural enrichment. The architecture of RM's hidden life was built on a foundation that only someone of his extraordinary intelligence could have designed. He turned his cover story into a brand. Think about it. Kim Namjoon is, to the public, the idol who visits museums. It's his thing, his signature. While other idols are spotted at clubs or shopping districts, Namjoon is photographed at the Tate Modern, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Liam Museum, galleries in Basel, exhibitions in Berlin. The media celebrates it. Fans adore it. It reinforces his image as the thinking man's idol, the intellectual in a sea of entertainers. Nobody questions it because it makes perfect sense. Of course Namjoon visits museums, that's who he is. But what if the museums were never the destination? What if they were the alibi? Korean investigative fan communities began questioning the museum narrative in late 2020, when a particularly meticulous fan account that specialized in mapping RM's solo travel movements made a discovery that sent tremors through the investigation community. By cross-referencing Namjoon's Instagram posts, his known museum check-ins, and publicly available exhibition schedules, this account demonstrated that on at least 6 occasions across 3 years, Namjoon posted photographs from museums on dates when those museums were either closed to the public or when the specific exhibitions he referenced had already ended. 6 times. Not once, which could be a delayed post. Not twice, which could be careless scheduling. 6 documented instances where the photographic evidence Namjoon presented as real-time museum visits could not have been taken on the dates they were posted. The implication was staggering. Namjoon was pre-photographing museum content during legitimate visits and then deploying those images later as digital alibis to account for his location during periods when he was actually somewhere else entirely. This is not the behavior of a casual social media user. This is strategic information management executed with military precision by someone who understood exactly how fan tracking culture works and engineered a counter-system designed to exploit its assumptions. The immediate question, where was Namjoon when he wasn't where he said he was, led investigators to flight data, and flight data led them to a country that nobody had on their radar, Sweden. Not London, where RM had documented connections. Not New York, where BTS had established professional infrastructure. Sweden, specifically, the Greater Stockholm metropolitan area, a region that would seem to have zero relevance to a Korean rapper's personal life until you understand one critical detail that changes everything. In 2017, during one of BTS's European promotional tours, Namjoon had a verified off-schedule day in Stockholm. This isn't disputed. There are fancam photos of him at a cafe in Södermalm, Stockholm's trendy southern island district. What fans didn't know until years later was that during this same trip, a Swedish entertainment blog, a small, niche publication covering K-pop's growing presence in Scandinavia, reported that a high-profile Korean celebrity had visited a private medical clinic in the Östermalm district of Stockholm, accompanied by a young Scandinavian woman. The blog post was in Swedish, published to an audience of maybe a few hundred readers, and attracted zero international attention at the time. It wasn't until 2021, when a Swedish army who had been following the global investigation translated the post and shared it with Korean fan communities, that the connection was made. Östermalm, one of Stockholm's wealthiest neighborhoods, home to some of Sweden's most exclusive private medical facilities, including clinics that specialize in obstetric care for high-net-worth international clients who require absolute confidentiality. Sweden's privacy laws are among the strongest in Europe, with medical information protected under regulations so stringent that even court orders face significant barriers to compel disclosure. For someone seeking medical privacy that no amount of dispatch reporting or Korean legal maneuvering could penetrate, Sweden would be, from a strategic standpoint, one of the most impenetrable choices on the planet. And Namjoon would know this. Because Namjoon researches everything. This is a man who reads academic papers for leisure, who has discussed Scandinavian social policy in interviews, who demonstrated awareness of Nordic governance structures during his UN appearances. The idea that he would select a country for its legal privacy framework rather than its tourist attractions isn't just plausible, it's exactly how his analytical mind operates. After the Swedish connection surfaced, investigators turned to Namjoon's solo album Indigo, released in December 2022, and what they found recontextualized the entire project. Indigo was presented as a musical diary of Namjoon's 20s, a retrospective of experiences, emotions, and relationships that shaped him. Critics interpreted it as introspective and nostalgic. But fans applying the Swedish lens to the lyrics discovered layers that standard interpretation had missed entirely. So here we are. 7 names. 7 stories. 7 layers of a mystery that stretches across continents, languages, legal jurisdictions, and the most scrutinized lives in modern entertainment. Let's pull back and see the full mosaic for what it truly is. Whether any of these stories are true, partially true, or entirely constructed from coincidence and confirmation bias, they illuminate something profound about the world we've built around these 7 men. We created an industry where human beings are expected to surrender their humanity at the door, where having a child, loving someone, building a family is treated as scandal rather than celebration. Every entry on this list, regardless of its factual accuracy, forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. If any of these men are fathers, the fact that they would have to hide it tells us far more about our culture than it does about their character. These are men in their 30s. Men who have given their youth, their privacy, their emotional bandwidth, and their physical health to an industry and a fandom that loves them fiercely but conditionally. The condition? Stay ours. Stay available. Stay the dream. And if life happens, if love creates something permanent and irreversible and beautiful, hide it. Hide it so well that it takes international fan investigations spanning years and continents to even suspect its existence. That's not a scandal. That's a tragedy. So the next time you see Namjoon at a museum, Jimin touching a ring beneath his shirt, Jin laughing a little too hard at his own joke, Jungkook staring into the middle distance during a live stream, Taehyung painting something small and tender, Youngie softening a melody he would have made brutal 5 years ago, or Hoseok going quiet when the world expects him to shine, maybe don't ask what they're hiding. Maybe ask what we've done to make hiding necessary. This has been your top 7. The channel is now closed. But the questions, those stay open forever.